Thank you all very much for being here. It's a pleasure to have the opportunity to have you at this conference, and obviously to see all these familiar faces. Thanks for attending, and welcome to the first lecture in this series that we call it Inspiring Dialogue, which is part of the preparation plan for the European Days of Jewish Culture 2021, which will have as its central theme dialogue. Today we have the pleasure of having Olga Kaczmarek, CEO of Forum for Dialogue. Olga will be replacing Susanna Radzik, the Vice President of Forum for Dialogue, could not be with us today due to force majeure, and I would like to say thanks for Olga for not having much time to prepare the presentation and for being here with us today. Olga, how are you?
Good, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
It's our pleasure, Olga, and welcome to the European Days of Jewish Culture Network and Family. Before we begin, I'm going to give the floor to my colleague Federico Sarfer, project manager of the European Days of Jewish Culture, who is going to tell us a couple of news regarding the festival. So, Fede, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Victor, and thank you everyone for being here. Thank you, Olga, as well. Before we move on to our speaker today, I would like to take this opportunity to remind you all that the procedures for organizing a European Days of Jewish Culture activity are now open and can be found on the festival website, which is jewishheritage.org/EDJC. I'm gonna paste the link in the chat later for your convenience. If you go to this website, you will find the links to download the practical information kit, which is a dossier full of ideas and suggestions on how to run a dialogue activity around Jewish culture and get inspired to organize your activity. You will also be able to see all the presentations of the coordinators meeting, download the editable files of this year's poster and banner, and you will also find a form through which you can send us your activities to be included in the official program and be disseminated at European level. Finally, and taking advantage of this occasion, I would like to announce a very, very exciting news for this year's festival edition. Thanks to the participation of the festival under the umbrella of the European project NOAA, Networks Overcoming Anti-Semitism, this year we will be able to award 70 grants of 500 euros each, so that you can print and exhibit the exhibition materials that are being prepared by the National Library of Israel. We are currently finalizing the terms and conditions of the participation and all the application process, but in the coming weeks, we will send you all the information through our exclusive newsletter for festival coordinators. So if you haven't already done so, I recommend you that you subscribe and keep an eye on your email so that you don't miss out on the announcement. I hope this opportunity that we have this year makes you as excited as we are. Now, without further ado, I will give the floor back to Victor to introduce today's speaker.
Thank you very much, Fede. We are about to begin. It's an honor that the first institution invited to participate in this series is Forum for Dialogue, an institution that it's a reference. Is the oldest and largest non-governmental organization engaging in Polish-Jewish dialogue. The forum's mission, realized chiefly in small towns and rural areas all across Poland, is to inspire connections between modern Poland and Jews living all over the world. As I said before, we have the pleasure to count with Olga Kaczmarek. She's the Director General of the Forum for Dialogue. Olga holds a PhD in Cultural Studies from the University of Warsaw, where she used to teach. She published a book on Emmanuel Levinas and postmodern anthropology. She also researched the memory of wartime of Polish-Jewish relation. She started as a School of Dialogue educator in 2012, and currently she's the responsible for Forum's operations and represents the foundation in Poland and abroad. So, Olga, thank you very much for being with us. The floor is all yours. Thanks again.
Thank you. Oh, I've unmuted, right? It's asking me to unmute, but I'm already unmuted. Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm very honored to be here, and it's a pleasure to be able to replace Suzette and to speak to you today a little bit about Forum for Dialogue. I have a little PowerPoint, well, Google presentation, whatever, prepared here that I want to share with you, because perhaps it will make it all that much easier to follow. Let me just master all the little, there we go, all the little windows that are here. We're almost there. There you go. So what I want to do today is I want to tell you a little bit about Forum for Dialogue, about our approach to Polish-Jewish relations and Polish-Jewish dialogue in Poland. We are Forum for Dialogue, as was already said, is the largest and the oldest nonprofit in Poland that specifically defines its goals in terms of Polish-Jewish dialogue and reconciliation. And what I want to say, Victor has already mentioned our mission statement. Every good nonprofit comes to a point when they come up with a good mission statement. I'm not sure ours is the best, but it's certainly the one we're using, and it's certainly one that reflects our commitment to dialogue, because we feel that ultimately the goal of our work is to inspire new connections between contemporary Poland and its residents and the descendants of the Polish Jewish community who are now living all over the world. But this is the big mission statement. But I have to say one more thing that I think is super important, and is sort of the other mission statement that we could be giving, and that is we deeply believe that it is that fostering Polish-Jewish dialogue and education in that realm and inspiring new connections, as I said, is also a way to build a better society and a better place in Poland today. So we really feel this is also how we are affecting Poland today. One more thing I feel I have to say here, and I always say, I know you are most particularly interested probably in the word dialogue and what we mean by dialogue in Poland today. But before we move on to that, I wanted to say a few words about what we mean when we say Polish-Jewish, because this is one of the things that can be unclear to understand and can actually be an obstacle in understanding. You may notice in that presentation that I use a slash rather than hyphen or anything when we write Polish-Jewish. These are two concepts that are deeply interwoven from our perspective in the history and the reality and the present of Poland. And so Polish-Jewish does not mean the Polish side having a dialogue with Jewish side, but it means the sphere of dialogue in between actors, ideas, traditions that are Jewish, Polish, Polish-Jewish, Jewish-Polish. It's a very mixed sphere. It's very important for me that we don't seem like we think of it in terms of an opposition, or even if in some contexts it may seem like one. So this is the first thing I wanted to say. And then I want to tell you a few things about us. First, I want to tell you what it means for an organization such as Forum for Dialogue to actually be engaging in Polish-Jewish dialogue, why we do it and how we do it in terms of the programs aimed at audiences in Poland and also the international Jewish community. And I will close with a reference to a few of our guiding principles. And if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them at the end. Or if this is your custom, we can also interrupt if that's what you prefer. Now, what is Polish Jewish Dialogue? Forum for Dialogue was first set up in 1998, and I feel that sort of lofty philosophical concepts of dialogue that were current back then were somewhere at the heart of how Forum became a forum for dialogue. But the truth is that the real dialogue, that as we've been doing dialogue for the last 20 years, I think every single person involved in the forum has their own understanding or a little situation or story that really illustrates what dialogue is. And of course, what some of the things you could say is that for us, Polish Jewish dialogue means that whatever is between Polish Jews, non-Jewish Poles, and everybody else involved in the conversation is too important to be left to the politicians. We live in Poland. Poland has experienced in the last 20, 30 years a number also of sort of earthquakes in the public life and political life related to Polish Jewish issues. And we believe the real dialogue happens when it happens between people, not between politicians and not as defined as the politicians. The other important thing is we acknowledge that the period of communism has really severed a lot of ties between residents of Poland and the descendants of Polish Jews and the international Jewish community, and has really severed a dialogue, has severed a conversation. So the basic premise is, of course, the openness to listen to how this shared yet difficult past is being told and remembered by everybody involved. This means the next thing as well, understanding and openness to acknowledge the emotions related to the difficult past, and finally understanding that one of our favorite, I'm not sure you would know him, that one of our favorite speakers tends to say, dialogue means I'm open to listen. I don't have to accept every part of the story as mine, but I acknowledge it's being given in good faith and openness. And that's also one of the important premises. But these are sort of the big things. One of the, I mentioned that each of us would usually have an anecdote telling you what a dialogue is. And I think I want to share a little anecdote with you. One of the things we tend to do is we bring together people in Poland, in towns and villages across Poland that used to have a significant Jewish population before the war, and who now are involved in preserving the Jewish heritage, educating about it, raising awareness. We bring them together with descendants of Polish Jews who now live abroad. And one of the results of such connection, as we call them, was the event that you can see in the picture here. And this is an interfaith, the first interfaith Passover Seder in the town of Radom that took place in 2016. And it was put together by an activist in Poland, a teacher and his associates who've been doing commemoration of local Jewish past for decades, and two daughters of Holocaust survivors from Radom now living in the United States. And the reason why I'm showing you this relatively uninteresting picture in itself is because if you look at the Seder, you will see that unlike what is customary, everybody has their Seder plate in front of them. And what would be normally, one plate on each table having one orange and one bitter herb and one piece of a chicken bone, everybody has their own. And what happened essentially was the two daughters of Holocaust survivors brought those little souvenir Seder plates from the United States, gave it to the organizers, and they thought what they have to do is fill every single one with an orange and bitter herbs and bones, etc. And so when Sharon and Hilda, the two ladies, came into the room, they were horrified because the plan wasn't to put a plate in front of everybody. The plan was just to give it out as a souvenir. But the reason I'm sharing that story is because for me, this is the epitome of Polish-Jewish dialogue, how I understand it. It takes time, it takes doing rather than only talking. And it takes accepting that whatever seems obvious to me may not be the default thinking of the other side. So in this case, Sharon and Hilda thought everybody knows there's one Seder plate on the table. And the organizers in Radno thought, well, they brought so many tables, clearly everybody has to have their own. And because, and in the best of faith, this miscommunication happened. But of course, it actually served a very good purpose of giving every participant of that interfaith Seder, most of them not Jewish, an actual idea of what Seder is all about. So this is how I like to think of dialogue. It's also miscommunications, but miscommunications that have good ethical result to them as well. And the other big question, I guess, about Forum for Dialogue that one may ask is why in Poland today, decades after the war, with Poland having changed borders since the war, with Poland having experienced major population shifts since the war, with, of course, Poland being a place, above all, where the Holocaust happened and where, in fact, almost the entire Jewish population of Poland was murdered in the Shoah. Why are the Polish-Jewish relations important today? In a country that hardly has any Jews, it does have a small Jewish community that I will say a few words about in a moment, but very limited. A country that is 97%, according to official statistics, Catholic. A country that has gone through the communist period, which for a variety of reasons meant obliterating the Jewish heritage and the Jewish past and the Jewish history of World War II. Why is it important to talk about it today and be involved in Polish-Jewish relations and dialogue today? And I guess our answers would be, first and foremost, of course, Poland is important to Jews as a place where many contemporary Jews trace their roots and a place where the Holocaust happened. And as such, Poland needs to understand what is the perception of what Poland is in Jewish history and the global history in that regard. But on the other hand, I mentioned at the beginning that I feel like what we're trying to do is we're also trying to change Poland for the better. I think it's also always super important to say, we always get asked about that a lot, especially as our organization is essentially a non-Jewish organization, mostly. Well, we deeply believe that Poland can never understand itself without understanding what it really means that it was built, among others, by the Polish Jews, and it was marked and changed forever by the violence and murder inflicted on Polish Jews during World War II, but also before. And I feel this is one big realization that happens to people in Poland more and more. And it's certainly, if you asked people at the forum about why they do get involved in that, sooner or later they would say, once you understand the impact of the Jewish history on Poland, you look at the place differently. Every single aspect of our culture and history is somehow shaped and changed by it and by an understanding of it. But of course, Poland is also a contemporary country where Polish-Jewish relations, as I mentioned, and anti-Semitism still mark the public and political life, and especially in the last 30 years. So again, a lot of the things that happen in Poland cannot be understood fully without understanding the importance of the Jewish history and presence in Poland. And finally, as I said, raising awareness of the Polish Jewish history and educating against anti-Semitism serves the purpose of improving democracy in Poland and building an open society. And that is very important to us. And I'll say a few words about that in a moment. But it's also about the fact that changing attitudes towards Jews in Poland and Polish youth, fighting prejudice against Jews, fighting anti-Semitism is also a way of fighting other forms of prejudice in Poland. So this is what I think is very important. And now a few words about how we operate. The biggest this is another big thing to be said here. Our main area of operation is Poland. The most of our audience are people who live in Poland today, most of them, almost all of them non-Jewish. So where is the dialogue, you may ask? And the answer is, we are convinced and have a ton of experience to back it, that in order for any meaningful dialogue to happen between Poland's residents today and the descendants of Polish Jews who are no longer in Poland, who no longer live in Poland, both sides, but our responsibility is mostly the Polish side, needs to be prepared, all right? Poland has, as I mentioned, gone through communism. There's a lot of lack of awareness of the Jewish heritage. There's limited understanding of what it really meant that the Holocaust happened here. There is limited understanding also in Poland of why people think of Poland the way they do, and what is the memory of the Jewish families who have survived Holocaust. So we believe any real dialogue has to be properly, thoroughly prepared on the ground. And so our biggest program is the School of Dialogue, which is Forum's educational program where we work with teenagers in towns and villages across Poland that used to have a significant population, Jewish population before the war, to inspire young people to discover the Jewish history of their town, to discover what it means that their town was largely Jewish before the war, to discover the Jewish heritage which is there, but has been either damaged or has been sort of unseen, unnoticed most of the time. And our job and the job of our educators is to inspire those students to think of the local history as Polish Jewish history, and to take responsibility for preserving the Jewish heritage, and to take responsibility and feel it's their mission to also educate others locally about the Jewish heritage of their town, which means essentially that what we do is that we have a series of 4 workshops with our educators where the students are sort of brought to research the local Jewish history in all sorts of ways. And then they come up with a walking tour of the Jewish history of the town and Jewish heritage of their town, where they are the guides and they pick a local audience of their choice who becomes the audience of their walking tour, and the students are the guides. And then it's usually supplemented with another element of a commemoration project, including films, videos, concerts, exhibitions, but also forms of material commemoration. So plaques, or cleaning up a Jewish cemetery, or mending a face, also a fence, sorry, mending a fence of the Jewish cemetery, all sorts of things like that. This is the School of Dialogue program. This is the biggest part of our operation, in fact. And this is working with students. But the other leg of our working in those towns and villages in Poland is working with grown-up activists, adults who are already there and who in one way or another are engaging in preservation of the Jewish heritage. They may be cleaning up the cemetery regularly. They may be teachers who teach their students on their own. They may be local authorities who make sure this is a topic that is being discussed and remembered. They may be construction workers who find pieces of matzevo, of Jewish tombstones that have been dispersed after the war or during the war, and bring them back to the Jewish cemetery. Or they may be people, this is one of my favorite stories, and I'll very quickly say it. They may be an electrician who, born in the 1970s, who at some point moved to a house in a town where they live, but found out as grown-ups that this was actually a house that used to belong to the last rabbi of that town. And it has a mikveh buried in the cellar. And this electrician, and there's a green, village green next door that people use to smoke and drink outside. And actually this village green is where the synagogue used to be. And the person I'm talking about, Narcis Listkowski from Rabka, he's a guy being an electrician, living in the mountains, working on building underground in Warsaw, would spend every weekend at home with his family, uncovering steps to that synagogue and then putting up a monument to say, this used to be the center of Jewish life for our town. And you, my neighbors, should know it and remember it and honor it. So this is the Leaders of Dialogue. We bring them together, we network them, we support them, we educate them, we provide them with some funding opportunities for their projects. And finally, the newest part of our operations in Poland is the Shared Heritage Program, a program targeting representatives of lay and ordained Christian, targeting lay and ordained representatives of Christian communities who can be leaders of change in their communities of faith. And this is the newest program, and I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but I want to say this is another thing we do. We feel it's super important to understand that you can't change the attitudes to Polish-Jewish relations in Poland without working with religious communities in Poland as well. And here is a little map of our operations. The School of Dialogue are the green dots. That's the 400 schools that had the program so far. The Leaders of Dialogue is a network right now of 90 people, but there's more to be invited to join us. And this is the Polish operations. And now very quickly, I'll just say a few words about how we reach out to help those connections between contemporary Poland and the Jewish people. We work with abroad as well, although it's more limited operation, for years and years and years. And this used to be my thing to do as well. We used to run a study visit program, study visits for leaders of Jewish communities from Israel, United States, Canada, etc., who would come to Poland for week-long in-depth study visits where they would engage, forum would have them engage in conversations about Polish-Jewish past, about Polish-Jewish present, about Poland today, but also to visit the places we work in and to have all those conversations about Polish-Jewish shared past and possible future that need to be had and that take time and that take commitment and that take, well, energy and sort of space to be done. The other things we used to do, or well, we hope to be doing again once the pandemic is over and people start traveling again. The other thing we do are the meetings. So we try and connect descendants of Polish Jews with students participating in the School of Dialogue program and with leaders of dialogue. We have a number of experiences that for people who have a connection, family connection to a village or town in Poland, coming from Israel, United States, etc., to be able to meet with somebody there who lives there and who really feels it's just for them as a resident of that town today important to acknowledge, honor, commemorate, and preserve the Jewish heritage. That it is a completely different way of reconnecting than if you just come and visit the empty house or not empty house inhabited by somebody else by now and only see the spaces, the urban spaces resonating with those who are no longer there, right? So this is what we want to be doing and we love doing before the pandemic, and this was really what made us feel the connections are possible. Other areas of operation internationally include a partnership with the AEPJ, American Jewish Committee, and also networking of Polish and Israeli public opinion leaders. And you should also know that for the last more than a year now, being unable to do all those things that we most love doing in terms of connections, we've been running the Zoom In on the Forum series where we meet weekly with our audiences, English-speaking audiences, and we have a parallel series for Polish audiences as well. But we have weekly sessions where we discuss all things Polish, Jewish, and it's called Zoom In on the Forum. And just to tell you a few things to sum it all up in the few of our guiding principles, because I think this will really put it into perspective, and then I'll be very interested in hearing your questions. Our guiding principles are, first, working outside big centers. As you certainly know, Poland had huge Jewish population before the war. And this means it wasn't, of course, there were big centers such as Warsaw and Kraków and Łódź and Białystok and Lublin. And these big cities with rich Jewish history know their history, know their Jewish history mostly, discuss it, have educational programs, preserve the heritage for better or for worse. But actually, where we believe the Polish-Jewish dialogue needs to be happening is in all those little towns and villages dispersed all over Poland that you could have seen on our map before, where the Polish-Jewish life and living together really happened. And this is where we focus on working and addressing the issues of Polish-Jewish dialogue. So this is the first thing. The second thing is we truly believe in what is here called the bottom-up approach. And essentially this means we are there to support and empower those who in those places are open, interested, ready to be involved in Polish-Jewish dialogue and in preservation of the Jewish heritage, etc., and leading the conversation rather than imposing anything on them. It is visible in the School of Dialogue program, where you would see we come with workshops that are a toolkit for students to fill in with their research and their projects and their interests. And it's certainly visible in the Leaders of Dialogue program, where we are just trying to support the participants of the program in what they choose to be their job in that area locally, because we know they know the context best, and we know that if this local town or village is supposed to become aware and open and sensitive about its Jewish past, it has to come from the residents of that place. So we believe in mentoring rather than lecturing, in empowering both the activists and the students. And also, one more thing that is a big thing for us is that we believe the Leaders of Dialogue is our model for that. that that it's important to show to people who care about Polish Jewish history and heritage that there is many of them and that they can be a force of change. One of the big experiences our participants of the Leaders of Dialogue Network have is that they may be doing something locally, sometimes occasionally against the interest and will of their neighbors and fellow residents. And as soon as they find out there is somebody 20 kilometers away who does a similar thing, they're already stronger by virtue of being together in this way, of supporting each other, advising each other, or even, just sharing whatever frustration they may be having. So we believe in those coalitions and groups, and we always make sure after each year of the School of Dialogue program that the students from each year see how big a group they are across Poland. We run conferences for participants of the Leaders of Dialogue Network so they can network and support each other and learn from each other. And the Shared Heritage program, the one for Christian leaders, is also based on the idea, if we show to people in the churches in Poland that there is many of them who truly care about Polish-Jewish relations, they are already set up for doing something good in that area. But we also have a deep sense of responsibility for our participants. We're trying to make sure we support them rather than in any way put them in difficult position. And finally, we really believe, and we've been taught by some recent crises in Polish-Jewish relations, that the real connections and the real dialogue happens when people connect between each other, not through programs, politicians, narratives, but actually through a conversation, a meeting, a doing of something. And if you had any, if you remembered in 2018, we have experienced quite a painful moment when the Polish government has passed what came to be known as the Holocaust law, which really affected the Polish-Jewish relations back then. And we all thought it's going to really be a rupture to what we'd managed to achieve. It actually turned out that our friends, the participants of our programs in Poland and abroad, they've been able to withstand the earthquake in the public discourses and media discourses in Poland and abroad about Polish-Jewish relations, with its steadfast belief in what we do, because they've seen it and they've had genuine relationships with others. And this is what we believe in, the connections, as we call it. And we have a number of stories that I'm not going to embark on right now, but this Passover Seder in Radom is an illustration of that if you bring together people, descendants of Polish Jews, contemporary activists in Poland who care for the Jewish heritage, they do amazing things, and they just go out there and do it on their own. And then they can just invite Forum for Dialogue to come and visit their Passover Seder. And we can just be happy that we got to introduce them to each other. And this is what we really hope to be achieving. And this is more or less all I wanted to say as a means of introduction to that conversation. And I hope you have some questions that I can now maybe answer.
Olga, thank you so much. That was really, really inspiring. Yeah, let's open the floor. I have a couple of questions, but I think that I will need to be polite and open the floor first to all the participants. And I can see here Valerie raising her hand. So please just unmute yourself and go ahead, Valerie. Valerie, you need to unmute yourself first. Yeah, sorry.
And so interesting. I just wanted to know whether the events in Israel have had any direct effect, as they have here in England, on Polish-Jewish relations. I mean, I witnessed myself driving down one of our main thoroughfares in the mainly Jewish area of London, a whole convoy of cars painted in Palestinian colors, waving the Palestinian flag and shouting insults at the Jewish community. I mean, that's really never happened before here. And I'm wondering whether you have been affected in Poland by what has been happening in the Middle East.
Right. So I understand you're asking about the current events in
Yes.
Israel and in Gaza as well. Well, what I would say is that, of course, we've been following the news, and of course, you have similar, I'd say, movements as you have in Britain and all over the Western world. Both very, some of them very pro-Palestinian, some of them anti-Israeli. These tend to be also not necessarily the same thing. But you should also, one thing you should know is that Poland has been, on the political level, Poland has been a fairly steadfast ally to Israel, also on the political arena over the last 30 years or so. So ever since the diplomatic relations between Poland and Israel have been re-established after the fall of communism, Poland has been an ally both in EU and other arenas or fora. But this does not, and also I'd say there's a number of people in Poland, which is not, I guess, not unknown to you maybe, that who are, you know, sort of Polish nationalist, but very supportive of Israel as well. That can happen as well. You have all sorts of combinations. But of course, the last few days, as I've been following all the news from Israel, I can also see on my Facebook, you know, a lot of people I know are either, can be very pro-Palestinian, anti-Israeli, but there are also quite a lot of people who understand the complexity of that so much better. So I'd say I won't be very original in saying we have all these movements represented just as they're represented in Britain. I'd say there may be slightly less, the anti-Israeli voice might actually be slightly less outspoken than it might be elsewhere in Western world, I'd say. Interestingly enough.
Thank you.
Thank you, Olga. Deborah, please.
Hi, thank you. So I'm Deborah Brunner. I'm based in the UK, but we're working in Belarus. So several of my team are on here. We've got some very similar sort of mission, I think. Some differences, but are definitely working in the same sort of way with this, trying to get to the same places. So congratulations on what you're doing. Couple of questions. One is, if you're working in sort of local villages and smaller places, how do you encourage people to become the social activists for social change? I would imagine not everywhere has a sort of somebody who wants to take the lead on that. And also the second question is, are you doing anything for as part of the European Days of Jewish Culture? It'd be interesting to know what you're doing.
Let me unmute. So thank you, and it's lovely, and I'm already remembering the name behind you, so to check it all up, and I hope we can be somehow in touch. I want to say this: the very idea of the School of Dialogue program, the way we run it, the educational program for teenagers, is that what it does is it sort of turns the students into the activists and actors of change. Because when you work with teenagers, and I'm sure in Belarus it might be a very similar situation, when you work with teenagers in a small town in Poland, you know, that was a shtetl essentially before the war, that might have a rather unkempt Jewish cemetery, And it may be it in terms of material Jewish heritage, or it may have a synagogue turned into a library, and it could have an old town street called Jewish, Żydowska in Polish, right? And those students, you know, they're in that town, they're probably looking forward to growing up enough to be able to move out. They think they live in the most boring, rundown, and economically excluded often or disenfranchised place in the world. If you show to them that this place has a history, that it is a history that affected the life of their grandparents, of their neighbors, of course, Jewish neighbors, but also their grandparents, that is completely unknown mostly to their parents, or to a very limited extent understood by their parents brought up under communism. If you show them that there's a past about that town that they have not been told about, what they essentially discover is their place anew. And they feel and learn through the program that they can make others aware of something important locally. And we have found this is a very effective way to bring about both a change in terms of local awareness about the importance of the Jewish heritage, and also this is an effective way of showing to students that they are capable of social activism. And I have to say, for us, one of the nice things about the program is also that the students learn that, you know, if you want to achieve something locally in terms of change and, you know, put up a plaque, you have to find allies in the local authorities who will help you do this. You have to petition somebody. You maybe have to collect signatures in support of your petition. And they do that, they put up a plaque, and then one more thing, the sort of added extra value of that program is that then maybe 2 years later, we do find out that the same group of young people got involved in a different cause locally, unrelated to the local Jewish heritage, but they've learned that they can change the local reality. And so this is how we have, to our own amazement, discovered that the working with young people that way is good and effective, and also working with young people actually meets less opposition than the grown-up activists experience sometimes. So this is the model, but then there are those grown-up activists who have a different ways of operating, who are often lonely, and then our job is to help them see there's more of them, and maybe advise them on how to build coalitions locally rather than antagonize potential allies locally. So there you go.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you very much. Thank you. And the second question, European Days of Jewish.
Oh yes, there you go. So I'm here actually quite abruptly to replace Zuza, but we are thinking about actually involving the leaders of dialogue in one way or another in that. And I hope I can't give you a more elaborate answer at this point because we haven't been directly involved quite yet. But I know Zuza has been in touch with Victor, I believe. So Zuza Radzik, the vice president of the forum, about what could be done and how we could be involved more. So I hope we'll have a more interesting answer to that question soon.
Good, thank you.
Thank you, Deborah. Thank you, Olga. Yes, I had the pleasure of meeting Susanna before, and for me it was a great discovery, not just Susanna, but also the Forum for Dialogue. So we started to establish a connection, and we will try to organize something in partnership for the European Days. So yes, it's underway. I don't know if I cannot see any raised hand on the Arthur. Okay, so I will go after Arthur, please, go ahead.
Yeah, hi, I'm Deborah's colleague from Belarus, and we're doing sort of the same work and working with the Jewish and non-Jewish community. My question is, I mean, historically, kind of, Poland was quite anti-Semitic, and how do you find working with especially the smaller sort of villages, communities, youth, as far as now, there is a quite in a big number of neo-Nazi sort of movements, and there's internet is open. How do you find? Is there any issues with that? Is there anything that you feel that you face anywhere? And if you do, how do you deal with that? How do you sort of go around it? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that question. So one thing I want to say is that if I showed you again our map of operations, and if you looked at the dots again, you would see that they're more dense in southern, central, eastern Poland. And this is because this is more or less where the sort of pale of settlement and the shtetls used to be. But this is also where contemporary research shows higher levels of anti-Semitism, which is due to a variety of causes, including, that in the West there's been population shifts, etc., etc. But what is important is we have always assumed that especially the School of Dialogue program is a way of fighting anti-Semitism as well. And we have always worked together with our partners at the Center for Research and Prejudice at the University of Warsaw to make sure we go to the places that do have higher levels of anti-Semitism rather than lower. And so this is one thing. The second thing is the School of Dialogue program, again to our some surprise, has proved very effective in sort of going around, as you said, any potential local hostility or opposition. Because if there are young people who discover local Jewish past and the richness of local Polish Jewish history, it's actually hard for the parents to say, no, if it's Jewish, we don't want you to be involved. It really, to our own surprise, in the 12 years of the program, has very rarely been an issue openly that, say, a school wouldn't, or the parents would say, we don't want this Jewish culture program at our school. It hardly ever happened. Of course, it's an intense program, 4 full days of workshops. So sometimes the school, we ask to have the program, they say, look, we have too much on our plate and we can't do it. And it's a legitimate reason to refuse, but which might be a cover up for a different one, but it also legit. But we've had situations where there's been such negative reactions, again, less than we thought, but we've had. And actually, I might just share one thing with you. And in 2019, we had the program in a small town of Przasnysz with relatively young students. And one of the parents got really furious about this Jewish program at their school. And they forbid their daughter to participate in it. And they've notified the school authorities of the region that there should be control at the school. There's been this type of negative reaction. But what actually happened is the teachers in the school had great support from the local authorities, from the mayor, who stood by the school for doing it. And what's more, the kids, like the 14-year-olds, they said, if they're trying to stop us this way, then we're not gonna get stopped. And we're gonna do more. And we're going to do a bigger project, and we're going to connect with the descendants of Jews of Przasnysz, because we will not be forced to adhere to that prejudice. And I admit, quite frankly, this is part of how we work. We work with the students' determination to do their own thing and feel empowered and feel responsible. So this is one of the things that I wanted to say. 2 more things I will say. One is, of course, leaders of dialogue, as I mentioned, the grown-up activists, they might be facing different reactions from their fellow residents. And sometimes they're frustrated by it. And this is what we're trying to support them in. And there's actually one of the reasons why we work with students in School of Dialogue program with the educators have been trained by us rather than local teachers, is because if you have an external educator, they also are in a better position to start that conversation. But the local activists, they sometimes face negative reactions to it, and we try to support them in that. And finally, I want to say, I mentioned the 2018 and the Holocaust law being passed by the Polish government. This was a huge thing that really also made us very worried that we would never get schools to get involved in the program again, with the big debate around that, and that the leaders will face much negative reactions to what they do. But actually, this was the most successful recruitment for the School of Dialogue program that year in years, and the leaders got even more committed. But of course, it was because people in Poland understood that either they understand the importance of the Polish-Jewish relations and don't ignore that they're being used politically, or they support a more nationalist current. So we sort of got people who share our views rallied around us even stronger than usual. So we wouldn't deny there are difficulties like this. We hear from teachers as well that it can be difficult. I could say so much about it, but also we know that, you know, I was the educator at the School of Dialogue at the beginning, and one of the big worries for us was, what do we do if there's a student who comes with prejudice and says something anti-Semitic? And the answer is, you respond to that at the beginning, but you also let them participate throughout, because very often with time, this particular person will become the most involved in the project. So it takes time, it takes involvement, and we always want to work with the entire community to try and change as much as we can of the attitudes. I'm just giving you a very quick answer to a very, very broad question, and I hope there is an opportunity to continue that conversation as well.
Thank you, Olga. I can see Penina and Muriel, and just after Penina, Muriel.
Good evening, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much, Olga, for your amazing presentation. I just want to reinforce the last point you were talking about. I want to reinforce with an example, not in Poland and not in Israel, but in Canada. As the director of the Holocaust Museum, we used to have groups coming to the museum. And the custom in Canada is that the parent has to sign a tour or a travel letter. And every so often, now please take it the way I say it, Polish descendants' families would object for their kids to come to see the museum and listen to a survivor and so on. And always I would call home and speak to the parent and listen to what he or she would have to say. And the bottom line is I wasn't successful always, and that's okay. But in most cases, the parents did give a release. So I think that many times when people object, like you said, is a matter of either personal memories, whatever they heard from their parents in their own homes. And it's our role as Jewish leaders, or as Jewish people who keep the Jewish heritage, like in the Jewish Heritage Days, to try and continue and keep the dialogue, keep the discussion, so to see it from a different perspective today, because since the war, we've had already almost over 80 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Penina. Maybe Olga, would you like to talk a bit more about this reluctance to participate for some of the youngsters, or any advice on that way?
I mean, one thing I want to say is that, of course, I take it, just as you said it, I'm not at all surprised that some of, especially, more conservative, right-wing leaning immigrants from Poland to the American continents tend to be more, again, right-wing, reluctant, etc. So I'm not surprised. And what I want to say is that what I said at the beginning is that it takes time. And working with students, we've had it so many times where you have a student. We actually have a film about one of the School of Dialogue program schools where we have a kid coming in and sharing this ridiculous stereotype about Jews that he'd heard from somebody right at the beginning, and sort of, challenges the educator with this. I've heard this, and then the students have that conversation, and then he gets involved, and then he becomes the driving force behind the project. So it takes time, it takes openness to give people space to change their attitudes, and that happens as well. What else? I wanted to say something else, but I forgot. But anyway, but I think the most important thing is that there is time and space for people to change and think and get engaged in thinking about it. And also, as I said earlier, for us, it's super important, say, even if we work with students, that we work with the entire class, right? The entire group of students, those very eager and involved and interested and committed, and those who are there on the fringes and like, I don't really care, right? Because they have a potential either to become the most active ones or to change just a little bit, but that little bit is already a lot. And I will share just one more anecdote that I like sharing. When I mentioned that we sometimes bring the descendants of Jews from that particular town to meet the students, and I did that with one of the study visits, and we had those ice-breaking sessions with students, and one of the participants of a study visit, a Jewish woman from Boston, she asked one of the students, a girl, maybe 17-year-old, she asked her, so what did your parents and grandparents say when you got involved in the project? And this girl didn't speak very good English. So she came to me and said, you know what? I can't say it on myself, could you translate? But I'd rather not tell. And I love that response, because for me, it meant she has created that little bit of space between her views and her grandparents or parents' views. And she felt the sensitivity of this new woman she's just met is such that it's enough that she says, I'd rather not tell, right? And the woman will know what was there, but she won't be the one uttering it. And for me, this change in attitude is also crucial in the School of Dialogue. So it's sort of like whatever we can achieve is a good step, I think.
Thank you very much, Olga. Muriel, please.
Hello, thank you, Olga, for sharing all these very interesting experiences. I have two questions. The first one, I was wondering whether you planned or you had already constructed a physical place or virtual place where you could share all these different and very interesting experiences within Poland, but also abroad. And the second question, I felt it was very interesting that Polish people, young Polish people, could meet descendants of Polish Jews. And in France, we both have migration of Polish Jews and Polish, non-Jewish. Do you have programs with abroad Europe, or maybe with both descendants who can have migration experiences and also different points of views?
So thank you for asking those questions. In terms of a place where we do have, we do have a website, but the truth about our website is that it's a very ambitious project that was supposed to bring together in one place all the experiences, as you mentioned, and it's very difficult to keep it up to date all the time and put all the students' projects and the leaders' work there. But I do encourage you to have a look at that website, and I'll put the address here in the chat section in a moment, and learn more there. And the other thing is, and the answer to the other questions, other question, if I understand correctly, you were wondering whether we work with sort of Polish immigrants and Polish Jewish immigrants. And that we haven't really done. And again, we have had some connections with what we call Polonia in Polish, the Polish immigrants in the United States and their families. But this isn't the easiest community to work with, because as Penina mentioned earlier, this is a community that tends to get little, for a variety of reasons that are typical, I guess, for immigrant communities. They tend to be more sort of closed in terms of fighting prejudice or acknowledging any kind of complications in the Polish heroic narrative of World War II, etc. So this is a more difficult audience to work with. It's actually easier to work with Polish people in Poland than with non-Jewish Polish people in the US. It's not the same for the UK immigration, which is a very different immigration, but that's a whole different story. So yeah, I think this is what I would say. We do sometimes have some connections with sort of academic communities, Polish and Polish Jewish in France, but that's a whole different ball game. Yeah.
Thank you, Olga. Here I can see that Olga is sharing the website of the Forum for Dialogue. Just to start closing the session, I'm going to ask you one question, Olga. Also, I'm going to take one question that Penina sent me, so I'm going to include it in my question. I think that one of the lessons that we can learn from your experience is this need to establish and to look for and to build coalitions. And as you say, I think that it's very interesting to state that dialogue is so important that we cannot leave it just to the politicians and the political arena, and how a bottom-up approach can consolidate an initiative in a very powerful way. So my question here, it will be like working with in the frame of inter-religious dialogue. How was your experience in that frame? There were also challenges or not sometimes, at least from people that are working in interreligious frames. bottom-up approach are all, again, very, very interesting, but maybe working with institutions or big institutions, it's a completely different story. So I will be very interested in knowing the experience of the forum in that field. Right.
So this is the very important question that for which you would be better off with Zuza than with me, but I'll try to answer. So the way we think about it, we focus mostly on what we call Polish-Jewish relations and Polish-Jewish dialogue, but we feel it cannot happen in Poland properly and thoroughly without an understanding and involvement in the interreligious aspect of it, right? But and the shared heritage program that I mentioned, the one for Christian, we say Christian leaders, both lay and ordained in Poland, both Catholic and other Christian denominations. This is the program that we launched originally in 2019, where we brought together, and this is important, we didn't really focus on clergy. We had some priests in the program, one fantastically interesting priest, Catholic priest in it as well, but a lot of lay journalists or thinkers who are actively involved in religious conversations and institutions, but are not themselves clergy. And that proved very effective because this was the bottom-up approach we treated, and this is the big shout out to Zuza, who I hope you have some opportunity to meet in person one day, all of you, because she's our theologian, but she is the person who understands deeply and believes deeply that the church, including Catholic Church, belongs to its believers, and it's in the hands of the believers to make it better. But this does not mean we're pretending the churches don't have hierarchy and don't have structures of power too. So of course, finding allies in the churches. So for example, in our case, finding the Archbishop of Łódź, who became the patron of the whole program and, you know, offered us room for a conference in Łódź and spoke to the group, was super, super important. But we sort of combined, the idea was to combine a proper support from those parts of the hierarchy who are open to that with an actual inspiration for those who work with the communities less formally than the clergy, right? So journalists, you know, their institutions, schools, people like that. And this has proved effective so far in building a great group. In 2019, we ran the program in partnership with the Yad Vashem, which meant they also spent a week at the Yad Vashem. And this year, we're sort of doing it as a series of more open Zoom conversations about anything Christian Jewish. But I'd say in the particular case of Poland, you have to be very clever about which parts of the Catholic hierarchy you approach. And if you do it smartly, you are able to get the type of support you need to work with the members of the church.
Excellent, Olga. Thank you again. I think that in terms of timing, we will need to start closing this session. First, I would like to say thank you to all the participants in this first conference of the series Inspiring Dialogue. It's always very special to see people from all countries in Europe, from Georgia to Italy, France, UK, Austria, Germany. I think that always, it's inspiring and it's a very interesting learning experience to share all these different visions from very different countries. And Olga, thanks to you for your presentation, and especially thank you for the work that you are doing in the Forum for Dialogue. I think that especially nowadays in the Europe that we are living, initiatives like that, they can make us be positive and to have hope and to continue working towards building better societies as you are doing. So thanks for being here today. Thanks for being a reference with your institution, and we hope to continue collaborating in different frames and in different manners. So again, thanks to all of you for participating today. We'll be in touch, and Federico, my colleague here, who I would like to also say thanks for organizing this conference. We'll be in touch with all of you with more details and information about the European peace. Thank you very much, and have a very nice afternoon.